Hi there, and welcome to the Untold Radio Network. This is Down South Anomalies. My name's Jay Katz, and I'm joined each week by my beautiful wife, Aspasia.
Yes, you are.
This is episode 26, and we've got an incredible guest. But as I say every week, Aspasia, we are broadcasting on stolen land, and we need to pay our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also appreciate the elders past, present, and emerging. But as I said before, we have a guest from one of our very first podcasts, probably one of the most respected, knowledgeable, and incredible researchers of anomalies from the Antipodean region.
That's right.
This man is a lecturer. He is an author, a writer. He is one of the most astounding field investigators with a great sense of knowledge to be able to take out there. He has an industrial chemist's background, and of course, he was I think our third episode.
He was,
which was a well-rated episode. Welcome to Down South Anomalies on the Untold Radio Network, Mr. Bill Chalker.
Thank you. Welcome to both of you, or hello to you, I should be saying. I'm not the one running the show.
No, you can welcome too.
Yeah, and it's so great to see you in your archives. I know you've had a very busy day, and we want to thank you so much for your valuable time in joining us.
My pleasure.
Listen, Bill, I would love to just step right into the recent moment. And that moment is February of this year when we saw 4 objects. One of them was definitely identified as a balloon, but the other 3 still remain as an anomaly in the US. I don't know if you can update us on that, but I would love to know how you perceive what was occurring over there from a ufological perspective.
Oh, look, I got to say, I was pretty underwhelmed and thought that maybe the US is getting a bit trigger happy, firing $1 million missiles at basically balloons that were sort of slowly moving across the United States anyway for several days prior to that. It sort of took them a fair while to basically get their act together to conduct that. I just thought it was a bit of overkill, essentially.
Have you ever witnessed before NORAD making statements like they did, though, saying we haven't discounted the fact that this could be literally an alien invasion?
Look, if I thought what was coming out of the United States, particularly the US military intelligence sort of angle, as being totally transparent and 100% on the ball, etc., I would accept it at face value, but I don't. We're getting sort of fairly obscure information. We're never getting the full story, and therefore I'm one of those ones that's sort of part of the great jaded UFO crowd that has been looking at the subject for decades, and we've sort of been there and done that in the past in probably small ways, but I do accept the fact that it was fairly unprecedented somewhat that we had these events there, and it kind of highlighted, I guess, the fragility of the US system, tweaked the NORAD system, and up come all these so-called UAP unknowns, but they weren't really UAPs as such, or they weren't unknowns. They were all benign objects allegedly, but we're not allowed to see them. So obviously there's a contradiction there. You would think that if we're not being allowed to see the imagery or all the detail, that there must be something of significance to them, but we're certainly not seeing any of the data on it.
Yeah.
And can you just illuminate for us this notion of removing filters from radar, which will then expose objects that are moving at a much slower speed than what is taken for civilian or military aircraft? Have you heard of that before? Have you heard about this whole notion of radar being limited to a certain level?
Yeah, it's sort of an ongoing exercise, because simply NORAD wants to ensure that they get that their filters are set up to ensure that they're getting the kind of things that they're obviously got a national security interest in capturing, and that is, things that look like ballistic missiles, the things that look like enemy aircraft, that kind of thing. And so they're not really there to pick pick up on these that are slow-moving, benign objects. But that probably, if there's any value to this exercise, it sort of exposed a bit of a soft underbelly to the American system, and that in fact this kind of aerial package could be used to deliver a little bit more than just a so-called lost or misdirected scientific meteorological system that the Chinese suggest this was what it was. But I think most people accept the fact that it was some sort of intelligence apparatus gathering information, and that is a sort of a gap in the system. So I presume they've tweaked their systems now to accommodate that and try and cover that kind of thing. So previously it was mainly things that were clearly enemy aircraft or missile systems, etc., and the systems were designed to pick that up. So that's my understanding of it anyway.
Okay. And I'm really curious about this new office that they've set up a couple of years ago, the AARO, let me get that correct, the All Domain Anomalous Research Resolution Office. Yes. So they're resolving these anomalies, which sounded to me that prior to this incident in February, that really only had about 3 or 4 people. It sounded like Ruppelt and Al Chump from the 1950s there at the beginnings of Blue Book. And now evidently that organisation's numbers have gone up into the hundreds or maybe thousands, we are led to believe, after these 4 anomalous incursions in the US. So do you know anything?
It didn't quite get as exotic as that in terms of numbers, but certainly Senator Gillibrand has been pretty active on trying to ensure that the office gets sufficient funding to do the task that Congress wants them to do. And,
which is what? Shooting down balloons?
That's not one of their jobs, because basically Dr. Kirkpatrick, he was really highlighting in his briefing that they're only interested really in unknowns, and anything that starts to creep towards an obvious known, such as a Chinese surveillance balloon, be it part of the intelligence apparatus of China, or be it a wandering meteorological system, as they were claiming, that just wouldn't fit into the normal umbrella of what the AARO is supposed to be doing, and that is dealing with things that are an unknown threat.
Sure. Right. Very interesting moment. I mean, I don't know if I think we did actually speak about this briefly before, but I'm very curious how you perceive, after all these years of research, what has been occurring in the US since 2017 and the whole ATIP program and the UAP and the people that have come forward with that information. A lot of sort of mainstream ufology tends to err on the side that we're looking at the beginning of government disclosure around this. But as you said before, I feel like we've been sort of coughed out of oblivion by too many smoking guns around this issue. But how do you see what has occurred over there?
I'm a little jaded, I have to put it. I'm in that basket. Considerable jaded feelings about it. We've been there, done that in the past and all that kind of thing. And if it was going to be truly transparent, and that they're all going to bring us into their kind of purview, and we're able to see a lot more information, well, we're not really seeing it. Like the latest presentation that Dr. Kirkpatrick did had some interesting pie charts and all that kind of stuff thrown into the mix, and some interesting videos, but it's, I got to say, from my point of view, pretty underwhelming. And there were sort of allusions to the fact that that eventually they're going to get around to looking at the history of the subject going back to 1945, I think, at the last iteration of the discussion at this point in time. But that's not the priority at this stage. Patrick was saying that essentially it was what they deem as possible threats to national security first, and then they'll catch up with the past. And I think that's going to take them a fair while to digest that, because to me there seems to be a lot of evidence that they're really slowly catching up to the substantial nature of past history on this subject. And there's a lot of curly issues there that they'll need to address.
What about the notion of them couching this yet again as a threat to national security? I mean, you've had a very strong relationship in this country with the RAAF. And
you got to be careful saying that, Jane, because now you're casting me as one of them. So,
well, you've been condemned out there many times for that, and I don't want to condemn you at all.
Don't get me wrong. I like our Air Force, but I don't work for them. Yes, I've had past access to files and that kind of thing. Yeah. It's just that, unfortunately, a lot of people cast me sometimes as either ASIO, MJ12, God knows what else, and any time that they see a connection, a lot of people assume that it's a dark deed, and I'm up to no good. There's a lot of paranoia out there in the UFO field.
And I certainly don't want to bring any more of that to bear on you. I think that is so undeserved and unfair. But how does what has happened in the US relate to our government here in Australia and possibly New Zealand in their stance to this subject matter? Have we seen any more transparency here?
Or any change in their policies?
I personally haven't seen those changes, although people that I know are alleging that those changes are in the offing, and that if we want to be continuing to be a all-in member of the Five Eyes arrangement, we're going to see a lot more, how shall I say, enthusiasm by our own Department of Defence for the notion that, yes, we're looking at UAPs or UFOs, depending on what they call them. And back in the day, our Air Force referred to them as UASs, or unidentified aerial sightings. And of late, particularly over the last couple of years, the last two reigning chief of defence parties were both saying that no, we're not interested. We'll let the United States take the running on that, and it's not something that we're interested in or even enthusiastic about. But there's a deep history, as you probably know, with regard to our engagement with the UFO subject at an official level. But I think that's possibly going to change in upcoming months, that maybe you'll see some amazing sort of 11th hour type sort of move towards an enthusiastic embrace of the UAP issue here in Australia.
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, look, let's just change the subject slightly radically here, because last night on Australian television premiered the 6-part TV series, the first episode, the pilot for Close Encounters Down Under. And I know you have had a history, and a very mixed history, with appearing in, televisual documentaries over the years. Let's just get that little image up there from the History Channel. It's a great shot of Bill. Is this you on oh, don't do that. That's on the MUFON program, Hangar 1, is it?
Unfortunately, I can't see you on the screen.
Oh, right, okay.
All I can see is a still image of myself and
that's
logo.
And I think that is taken from Hangar 1, the MUFON TV series. Did you appear in that?
Oh, thank God, no.
No, you didn't. You didn't.
No, well, not Hangar 1. No.
Ancient Aliens?
That might be from Ancient Aliens, that one.
I'm afraid if there are any fans of Hangar 1 out there, I'm afraid I was appalled by the series. So
right, okay.
I just was not impressed.
How did you feel about the episode last night that went to air of Close Encounters Down Under? How was your feelings about that?
I kind of liked it. It was kind of gave me that warm, fuzzy feeling that perhaps, commercial television or commercial entities are starting to take notice of the long, deep history of the subject. And it's good to have an exposure of the subject down under or in Australia over, I guess, six episodes. So from my point of view, it was great to see. And the first episode highlighted a little bit of history, with the Tully case, and the rest of the cases present a bit of a mixed cross section of what's going on in more recent times. So I think it all augurs well that there's something of interest there, and I think people, if they watch the show it'll be of interest to them. It'll just give them a broad spectrum of cases. Yeah, and some are quite interesting.
I am really happy to hear that because, gee whiz, we were the ones that sort of approached you in terms of appearing on that series, but I wanted to step back for all those reasons you stated to me before, because you can become a moving target if you're too close to the source when this stuff goes into that series. But I think in a way, Max Murch and EQ Media handled this series very well for what it is.
Well, I haven't seen it yet.
And I came home from work last night and asked Asper what the first episode was like, and you were.
I still haven't seen it.
You were searching for Seven Mate.
Yeah, I was.
But it's on Seven Prime. Is that it? Or
if
Plus?
I can't find Seven Mate on the television,
Seven
how the hell
Mate,
am I going to find a UFO?
Yeah,
it's on Seven Plus.
7 Plus. Yeah, they've changed it to 7 Plus.
They've done it. They've done it. I think that it's the two series. You know, 7 Mate and 7 Plus. They seem to be clones of each other. And I got to admit, I was quite pleased to see it. It kind of, if you didn't know where you lived, like myself, if I didn't realise I was living in Australia, I would have thought, gee, there's a nice place to visit. It was almost like a UFO tourist show. So it was
wow. Okay.
Australia looks like a good place. We know it is. So
it's just becoming extremely expensive. We're all being brought out of it. You know what? A lot of people actually made that statement to me that they thought, hey, this is a really great. The Tourist Bureau should be on board with this.
I know. I think Max should be talking to them and you know, getting some subsidies from the government.
Maybe it should be, where the bloody hell are the UFOs?
And I'll be there to provide a UFO tourist facility, you know, for wandering sort of TV or wandering tourist sort of inspections of UFO hotspots if they're at all looking for anybody.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. I'd love to. That'd be a great way to go into.
I'm not sure whether I'm serious about that, but
all right.
I'm probably being
sure.
Yeah, well, you're with us. There's no other way to go at times. Look, you just spoke to me the other day about finishing off work for an extraordinary series of books that have taken many decades by an astounding researcher in the US, Jerome Clark. So can we get that little picture of Bill up there with a couple of copies of what is probably the best UFO encyclopedia series ever?
Yeah.
And can you tell us about this series and your work with Jerry Clark?
Yeah, meanwhile, I'll grab the real thing behind me.
Do it. Yep.
I love your library. I love that area.
Yeah, I love my library too. So.
Do you think there's some sort of book fetish that happens to ufologists and we just turn into these bookish obsessives, bibliophiles?
Well, look, I know of many ufologists that have never looked at a book, so it's not necessarily a prerequisite of being a serious ufologist, but I certainly recommend it. There's a powerhouse of knowledge in a lot of the literature. Unfortunately, I can't say that about all the UFO literature. You know, sometimes I hear the desperate screams of dying trees that have been sacrificed to create some UFO books that I'd rather not see on bookshelves. But beyond that, there is a lot of interesting material out there, and I think Jerry Clark's encyclopedia series that's now possibly coming up to its fourth manifestation. It's been a long project, and I've been involved with all the different editions, and so it's been a fantastic kind of attempt to try and bring a summary of sort of some of the more interesting information about the UFO subject on many diverse subjects, and using a number of different people to try and provide that data. And obviously, all kudos to Jerry or Jerome Clark that he's done the major structural detail of the encyclopedia series, and luckily people like myself and others have been sort of asked to invited in to create contributions that are of importance in other particular areas.
Those volumes look massive. Can you just hold them up? Because what we've got is we've just got a compendium that was released popular, that's very small in comparison to those two. Wow, they look wonderful.
Can you see those now?
Yes, yeah. How brilliant.
How many pages in each one? What's the...
Was in volume 1, which in 3rd edition was from A to M. There was only
It's a lot of pages.
Only a few pages, 785.
Okay.
Wow.
And then it finishes off at 1,400 and...
wow. Okay, about 700 pages each.
Yep.
How remarkable. What is that shot on the cover? I'm very curious about that image on the cover. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, you'd have to check with one of the contributors to this 3rd edition, and it's a South American photo, and
Sorry to put you on the spot there in that regard.
You really did.
And I didn't mean to.
There is a story behind that photograph, and I'm trying to remember the photograph. But it's my friend in South America, Tagio. He's done most of the contributions on the South American side, particularly the Brazilian stuff, and that photograph, I think, does appear in that volume. So there's the thing that really excited me about him being involved was that there was excellent coverage of some of the more interesting events down in South America, particularly Operation Prato, which is the Brazilian government's military intelligence sort of field investigation of the UFO phenomena that sort of centered around that phenomena of the chuppa-chuppas, and it was extraordinarily an example of a really interesting field study by the military that was set up with all sorts of field equipment. We're able to secure dozens of photographs, and if I can actually find they put under Operation Prato.
And what are those books worth now? They must be a hell of a thing to air freight in, the size of them. And can people? They're still all in print, aren't they?
I think pretty much so. You can certainly get the 3rd edition. You know, to me, it's worthwhile getting them all. That's why I've got all the editions, and it's just chock-a-block full of so much fascinating information. And coming from a jaded UFO researcher that's been involved in the field for decades, if I find it interesting, I think it's very interesting. Yeah. The only criticism I passed on to Jerry was the print's pretty small. You know, I think the print size could have been upped a bit, but that would have made it
more pages, heavier.
Yeah, 4 volumes instead of 2.
Well, yeah.
And are they available on Amazon, the hardcover ones?
Yes, they are.
Wow.
Yeah, and for those that are more interested in very short duration reading, there's even an edition where they split up the encyclopedia into multiple, much shorter offerings. You know, some people seem to be intimidated by massive books, and therefore they wanted the same thing, but chopped down into smaller, select volumes, that kind of thing. God. But me, I'm a bit of an encyclopedia junkie, so
yeah.
I like the final product, the hardback. Although my copy did go AWOL, it got lost in transaction, went to, I think, Austria instead of Australia, and then eventually worked its way back to Australia.
Oh, so it did a bit of a circumnavigate.
It's already
that wasn't courtesy of Amazon. That was courtesy of the publishers. Not that I'm implying any criticism of the publisher, but
no, yep.
I am really curious as to your knowledge of literature, and are there a few books that you would recommend to people getting into the subject, or that you believe are books that are valuable to have in your ufological library?
Well, I'd certainly plug the encyclopedia because it's a good one-stop way of accessing decades of UFO experience, the UFO culture, the whole subculture of it, the whole attempt at creating a UFO science, and now turning into the UAP subject. I think they're going to still call it the UFO Encyclopedia rather than converted to UAP Encyclopaedia,
Yeah.
because and I'm fairly pleased with that. I'll take it whichever sort of terminology is used. It all means essentially the same thing, even though the US government with the term UAP is making it a lot more ambiguous term. So,
Yes.
you've got, unidentified aerial object, unidentified aerial phenomena, unidentified aerial platforms, which usually segues to drones and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's essentially now, I think, gravitated towards unidentified anomalous phenomena. So that's a bit of a catch-all. Personally, I would have been happy if they stayed with UFOs, but they seem to feel that it's been so besmirched by the extraterrestrial connotations of it. But when you look at Alan Hynek's sort of definition of what the UFO means, it's essentially that. It's unidentified, unexplained. It's nothing in particular. It's not telling us that it's extraterrestrial. You have to do a bit more hard work to get to that category.
I think they've changed the name because for all these years, since 47, they've been denying that UFOs exist, full stop. And then all of a sudden now to come out and say, well, we're actually going to start looking at these things, just in case they are a problem with, defense. And so, but if they change the name, it's like, no, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with this new kind of phenomena. It's,
well, part of the argument
away.
for changing the name is to make it a little bit more accessible and okay to look at from a scientific point of view, because there's a lot of dead weight sort of attached to the UFO subject or the UFO term, and it's been out there quite a long time.
Well,
but
they're the ones that attached all that dead weight to it.
Well, good on you, because I was going to make that point before. Yeah, that is true, quite true.
Yeah, they did that.
Yeah.
They.
That amorphous entity, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
How have you, over the decades, and I mean, first approaching this subject, how have you dealt personally with all the noise attached to the signal, from the ridicule and the skepticism? Did that ever, disheart you? Did that ever stop you?
Yeah.
Did you ever have moments where you thought, I can't keep looking into this? This is just too much to deal with?
My credibility is going,
not really. No, I've always had fairly good receptions from most people. Although I got to say, I've been a bit, how should I say, underwhelmed by the perceptions that people have of why I'm here looking at the UFO subject or UAP subject. People who feel with not much critical thinking that I'm kind of clandestine, or I'm part of the government, or part of all sorts of exotic different types of organisations. They don't seem to be able to cope with the idea that I'm just an enthusiastic sort of researcher who has been fascinated by the UFO subject for decades, and trying to make it a bit more apparent, a bit more obvious to people out there that here's a subject that's important. And that's why I'm certainly pleased that it has a much higher credibility profile at the moment. But it wouldn't take much to undo that.
Oh, no.
Particularly if the aero comes out and says there's nothing to see here, folks, and that would be like a sense of deja vu, that we've found nothing that's unexplainable, that kind of thing. If that tends to be the possibility of an end game here, well, then it's more deja vu and much the same as what's been done in previous decades, because I think once they start to focus on the idea of the whole history of the UFO or UAP subject, going back to 1945, there's got to be a fair degree of accounting as to what's gone before, and if it's at all serious. There's some pretty serious issues that need to be addressed.
That were never addressed.
Absolutely, yeah.
And why weren't they being addressed? For what reason? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you don't have to go back. Well, you go back to the early years of the subject and the Robertson panel, convened by the CIA, to basically downplay and debunk the subject simply because they were concerned about the effect of the signal or the sighting. It didn't matter what was involved. They just thought it was a potential weapon to basically stuff up the reporting systems and that kind of thing, and therefore they wanted to give it less credibility and debunk it. And I've got to say they were pretty effective with that. But it's had its impact, and I think as one drills down into the deep history of the subject, there's going to have to be a lot of, I don't know, explanations, but as to what's been going on in the past. I think there'd be a lot of, but obviously a lot of people that were involved in all that kind of toing and froing back in the 50s and late 40s are no longer with us. But there were certainly massive changes that went on that undermined the credibility of the subject.
Do you think one of the problems, I'd assume, with you being demonized a little bit in the UFO community is that people are intimidated by an academic, someone who does have credentials and the ability to take an aspect of science into the field and do that research? Because this is a subject matter that touches people over many different disciplines, but seems to also bring a whole world of people that are attracted to flights of fancy without doing the research.
I think that's inevitable with anything that's not adequately understood, and I don't think I'm a particularly intimidating person, and I think if people get to know me, I'm pretty approachable, and I've just tried to really apply the sort of an attempted careful investigation, and in order to progress the subject in terms of credibility, you really have to do a lot of deep investigations, because mainly mainstream science and other kind of institutions are not going to be kind of convinced by superficial investigations. I think it's readily understood that that there needs to be an extraordinary investigation, and so that's really the basis of it. That unfortunately a lot of baggage has attended the UFO subject over the decades, and while some of it constitutes legitimate attributes of the subject, or perhaps aspects that are not well understood, many of them have had the effect of undermining the central credibility of the core subject, and that's part of the problem. I'm not arguing that they should be avoided, but we should have a more coherent and reasonable kind of critical thinking when it comes to the UFO subject, rather than embrace every amazing claim that comes down the pipeline.
And I think it's important for people to be aware that if this subject is to be advanced, that we do need orthodox science to come on board, and we do need credentialed people to start looking in and researching it. And I think it's incredibly courageous of yourself to have been so consistent over the number of decades. And I wasn't actually in any way insinuating anything more than the fact that I am well aware that within certain circles, your research is highly respected and highly acknowledged. But when we go out there into the public domain, where we have a bulk of people that may be affected extensively by what happens in popular culture, which 9 times out of 10 is exploitation, what may be occurring in disinformation, and what may be occurring when people acknowledge systems of power that they're taking into question, that it's way too easy to demonize someone that's coming at this from a very legitimate point of view.
Yeah, well, a lot of people want to have their own kind of, I guess, perspectives that they might bring to it, sort of validated, and therefore they're not particularly interested in, I guess, a deep dive, a deep scientific investigation. They just want perhaps their belief systems to be reinforced or supported and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I can understand that, but at the same time, if there's a divergence of that between what's really going on and what a particular person's belief system thinks is going on, it needs to be sorted out, and I think people need to sort of educate themselves and broaden their knowledge base, and things like this massive encyclopedia project would help that, but also a lot of critical thinking about what's been going on, what's happened in the past, that kind of thing. Don't take everything at face value, and really do deep dives on a lot of aspects of the subject, because a lot of the things that have gone through the I guess the history of the UFO subject, a lot of it hasn't been positive. A lot of it has undermined the credibility of the subject, and but again, I guess you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You need to critically examine a lot of these things to see whether there's anything of value in amongst that. The less credible aspects of the UFO subject. UFOs seem to get blamed for everything in the modern age.
There is that aspect that keeps consistently coming up with worldwide reports, and that is that even from anomalous sightings of things like light orbs, or what we term in this country the Min light, to a full-blown UFO encounter, people feel like there's some personal attraction to them, the observer, the person witnessing this. And there is just so many cases that can actually, I think, tip an individual over. They're already suffering some sort of consensus reality collapse when confronted with this phenomena. And then they start to realize that this phenomena might have some personal link to their consciousness, or them as an observer that could tip them over to that side. Do you think there is a consistency in this phenomena that I can't speak of in a singular sense, but seems to encompass all sorts of anomalous phenomena when it comes to people observing or experiencing it?
Oh, I think there is a measure of that kind of thing, and certainly there's a lot of arguments to support the idea that there is a consciousness element to this subject. I think, as you're probably aware, I was writing articles way back in the 1970s on UFOs and what we would deem to be the psychic connection, etc. And that was deemed to be controversial at the time, and yet now we're seeing all manner of sort of paranormal dimensions talked about as if it's the new thing. And even with consciousness, it's the new development. But researchers have been highlighting and investigating that since the very beginning of the UFO. But it's been there. It's just that people are a little late to the game trying to discover that, or they'd rather their own investigations and research to be front and center and deny what's been going on in the past.
And I think, it can, from a therapeutic perspective, that consensus reality collapse, when people have this conscious moment of recognition that they're dealing with something way outside of their paradigm, their frame of reference, can actually create a whole bevy of psychological problems as well, that can push people into an obsessive way of trying to research the subject and believe that that subject is something that they can unravel personally, and no one else literally is going to have their perspective on it. And that's a really tough thing to deal with.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to the individual. There are plenty of people that have committed their lives to this subject and perhaps not benefited on a personal basis, or they've been affected deeply by it. And but I think it's a subject that is very, very complex, and I think you need to have a bit of a reality check from time to time, and have a life independent of UFOs as well, or UAPs, and be able to take a wander away from the subject from time to time and recharge the batteries, or have other interests. I've got many other interests, and and therefore I suppose that's allowed me to survive the decade and still maintain an enthusiasm for the subject, despite a lot of eccentricities to the subject.
I think they're very, very wise words, and they're very good words therapeutically. If I can just take a little left turn here. I think we're getting a cross message there. I don't know what. Bit of echo.
Unless we're hearing that.
Have we got the sound up on this?
I don't know.
Maybe that paranormal element coming through to play.
It may be slipping in.
Oh, that's really kicked in hardcore there, doesn't it? Is that what's happening?
Is that better? Can you hear us, Bill?
Yeah, no problem. I might hear it.
But is the
speaker
on?
What speaker?
Speaker on the computer. How's that? Can you hear us? Take the mic
This
up.
one?
Yeah. Take it up. No. We are getting feedback here. Hold on.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I've had no change, basically.
Okay,
Right.
I think we must be getting some sort of feedback in our headphones. Which is bizarre.
Yeah.
I wonder how I can bring you guys up on the screen. I just don't have you guys up on the screen, so it's a bit confusing for me.
Oh, right. Okay.
We're not on your screen?
No. You just got the logo and a still picture of me.
Isn't that interesting? That's odd.
Well, you.
Do I have to press camera?
Sorry?
There's actually a line through the microphone here, but you can hear me okay. But
we
camera,
can hear you. We can see you.
But we're getting feedback.
I might just press camera and see what happens.
Okay.
Maybe the program will self-destruct in 6 seconds. We'll see. Right.
Oh no, you've gone. No change. You're on screen now.
Yeah, no, there's no change for me here, so I'll just stick with
no problem.
I'll stick,
As long as you're not hearing the feedback, we'll just have to go through.
Yeah, but I'm afraid that feedback might be recorded for us.
No.
Are you sure?
Well, what do you want to do?
Should we exit studio and go back in?
Who, us?
Yeah. Let's try it.
You just stay there.
Mike's not doing that now.
Hello? Can you hear us now?
Yep, no changes then.
But you're still not seeing us?
No. Maybe I've got to press a few buttons here, but
you're not getting any.
Look, we can see Bill. He's on there. We can hear him. So let's keep going with it.
Are you getting that feedback?
Yeah.
No, what are you hearing?
We're just hearing ourselves repeating in there.
Don't worry about it. I'm not getting that.
Okay.
All right. Well, if you're not getting that, let's go ahead. I wanted to take that left turn to a book that's coming out by. That is really disturbing. I can't do it. You want to talk about Tony Healy Paul Walker's book?
What do you mean?
About the Yowie.
The new book. What was it called?
The Yowie.
The Yowie.
Yeah, I can do that.
That is really disturbing.
Just forget about it. So we wanted to talk about Paul Cropper and Tony Healy's new book, The Yowie, coming out.
And how you actually see that phenomenon yourself. And do you think that phenomenon is like a flesh and blood singularity, or there is a spiritual, maybe paranormal aspect to that as well?
Yeah, well, I know that I've been mates with Paul Cropper and Tony Healy for decades, and I've just got my copy of their latest book. If you'll grab it, hang on.
Beautiful.
Nice cover. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It's basically it's saying here there is a very widespread belief amongst Australian Aboriginal people that huge, shaggy man-like creatures lurk in the continent's rugged mountains and deep forests. The mysterious beings which have been encouraged since time immemorial are known by many names, including Dolgari or whatever it is, and several other names. But in discussions with outsiders, the term hairy man is often used. And in the early 1800s, when they began encountering the hulking horrors, British colonialists employed terms such as Australian apes, yahoos, or yowies. Nowadays, they're generally referred to as yowies. and basically the authors, Paul and Tony, came out with their book, The Yowie Through Anomalous Books, in 2006, and this is kind of like a companion volume, and it's kind of a fairly detailed catalogue of cases, and I think there's what's the number count? Yeah, 273 cases, and it really, from my take, provides a really good cross-section of data on the subject, from cases going back to early times through to the modern day. So it's a good study, and it reminded me of the fact that, you know, I'd actually looked at one of the cases that was mentioned at Woodinbong. There were some quite extraordinary cases coming out of Woodinbong during the 70s, Woodinbong up on the north of New South Wales, and actually just try and grab that case was quite fascinating, simply because it implied a fair degree of physical evidence. If we could find out where the hell maybe look up the index book. Yeah.
One of the interesting things I've found about this research is in the States, they seem to be very polarized between this being a relic hominid, like Gigantopithecus, or sticking to the indigenous stories that there's a spiritual edge to this, and that people actually experience all sorts of anomalous phenomena whilst experiencing sighting of the Yowie.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I experienced at Woodinbog, because I was doing UFO investigations up there in the general region there at the time, and I had the opportunity to drop into Woodinbong, and I thought that Yowie researchers would be interested if I did an investigation of anybody that I could find to talk to about on that. There was a couple of kind of investigations I did. One with some local Aborigines, which I wasn't able to record. But the implication was that from them that this was kind of almost like a paranormal phenomenon, that it didn't have a physical aspect to it, and it would avoid any attempts to try and verify its physical existence. It was almost a shamanic kind of take on it, and a mythic take, but one that was a bona fide aspect of Aboriginal law in the area for hundreds of years. And the other take of it, though, was that there were two significant cases that were of prominence, only one of which I was able to talk to. But the book covers both cases, and essentially it was one that involved Mrs. Thelma Cruz that I was able to look at directly and go to the location and talk to her. And essentially her experience involved there was a disturbance amongst the local dogs, and she looked out the window to see what was the cause of the disturbance, looked into the street from the window and couldn't see anything, then looked back onto her property, and further along towards the side of the house, she sees this rather large, sort of hairy figure standing there, and it seemed to be doing an unusual kind of hand motion, almost like the behaviour you get from gibbons, that they have this kind of rotating hand thing. And she looked at it and was quite surprised with what she was looking at. And then the thing ambles off up the driveway and into the bush. Now her property, or her house, was literally on the edge of Woodinbong, and if you walk across the street, it just goes into very dense bushland. And but what there were other people that had sightings. The other one that involved a lady and encountering a Yowie that had grabbed her dog, and the dog was sort of growling at the thing, and the creature grabbed the dog and hugged it to its chest, and then dropped the dog, and then takes off. But that dog had pretty severe effects, and also an odour that was almost impossible to get rid of. And unfortunately, the dog passed away a few weeks after that event. So it's hard to, I guess, avoid the fact that there are some obvious intense physical effects in some of these cases, but equally those that have been involved in some form or other for hundreds of years. I'm talking about local Aborigines, and they have a different sense of what this phenomenon is about. So, and I know that from the point of view of Tony Healy and Paul Cropper, they have each come to different viewpoints over the decades, and it's good to have that kind of divergent views about what's going on here. I think Tony seems to feel that there's a paranormal element to this, and that Paul is less prone to that kind of take. He kind of feels almost like it's kind of a form of an anomaly that doesn't equate to a physical reality, and yet I've had discussions with him as recently as a couple of days ago. I guess we agree to disagree or argue about the phenomenon, which is a good thing. I think it's a complex phenomenon, one that I haven't. I'm no expert on Yowies, by the way, but I do from time to time encounter stories just like the Woodenbong stories, and that's why, as a kind of an anomalous orientated person, if I've given the opportunity, I'll investigate the story, and that's what I did in the Woodenbong case.
I'm really curious as to your perspective on that from a personal point of view. Do you think it runs consistently along the same lines as ufology? Do you think the ufological sightings sort of have a similarity to this sort of obviously contradictory nature of the Yowie or the Bigfoot?
Well, that's why I'm interested in getting or reading the book deeply, simply because it provides a lot of history about the phenomenon, and maybe my views will change a bit. But yeah, there is that kind of mirroring aspect, and you get people like Stan Gordon in the United States, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, where it's kind of like high strangeness central there for Bigfoot UFO connections and that kind of stuff. Literally cases where UFOs have been seen in close proximity to Bigfoot type entities, and there's some pretty bizarre cases out there. We've had hints of similar cases here in Australia, but not documented to the degree that is occurring in places like Pennsylvania under the watch of Stan Gordon, and he's done some quite extraordinary investigations, and one of them seemed to involve, I think as it turned out, probably around about the same vintage of a case of what was documented in the Flying Saucer Review back in the day, I think in 1973. I could be wrong on the date, but it was of that vintage of a multiple close encounter with it. It had a UFO element to it. It had a Bigfoot type element to it, and also what appeared to be like a form of possession of the main witness, who seemed to have had a pretty bizarre experience associated with that episode. It was a really strange case, and I suggest that those people are interested in either look up FSR, which I think you can find through various digital libraries here on the internet, or look at Stan Gordon's books on what happened in Pennsylvania back in the 70s. It was a pretty strange time, and yet I've investigated cases of UFOs or apparitions that also involve possession type things. There are some very strange correlations going on here. So I'm not kind of advocating that this is the core aspect of understanding the phenomenon, but I think one has to keep an open mind as to what might be involved.
It's very interesting too, and I thank you very much for that introduction to Tony Healy. He was a great interview and a very sweet, accommodating human being, and a great researcher in his own right. And he seems to have found an extraordinary correlation there with Black Panther sightings and these very parallel hominids and other anomalous phenomena as well.
Yeah. Well, those sort of correlations seem to exist, like even in my little favourite area up on the Dorrigo Plateau back during the 1970s, where I had the fantastic opportunity of looking into UFO phenomena on a almost nightly basis at Lake Chiringan to Darabin, and we would go back there on a pretty regular basis. I'm talking a sort of an informal team, an ad hoc team that mainly I was the main bunny that sort of went back on a more regular basis and practically lived there for a couple of weeks during university vacation periods and documenting a live UFO phenomenon on the way. But throughout it all, there were strange phenomena going on. There was a history of Yowie type phenomena, not necessarily at the same time as the UFO wave, but some pretty bizarre phenomena, paranormal phenomena, all that kind of thing playing out. So it was a pretty peculiar time, and I've seen that pattern repeat itself over the decades. So even as places like Northwest Cape came under attention, you know, there was the case that I documented fairly heavily and referred to in the Oz Files, my book from 1996, that involved two base people, one lieutenant commander, Maya, and the fire captain of the base, independently observing a dish-shaped object to the west of the base, and that created quite a striking kind of situation. I wondered at the time whether it was some sort of very advanced drone, but there seems to be nothing in the US arsenal or foreign arsenal at that time back in 1973 that would explain this kind of encounter. But you know, Lieutenant Commander Meyer said that this thing demonstrated an extraordinary amount of speed, way beyond anything that he was familiar with. And on the same day that the base was used to issue a full nuclear alert to US forces in the Indian and Pacific region, simply because it was misread from a Syrian intelligence message that the Russians were going to go into the Middle East during the Yom Kippur War. And so the case occurred on the same day as that particular communication to US forces. And I think it got down to DEFCON 3 or the highest peacetime rating before you actually into full scale war. And so it was an interesting case happening on a pretty heavy duty day. But, you know, the point overall I was going to get to was that Ross Coulthard has highlighted, and researchers and friends like Keith Basterfield have found other cases, and I've talked to people as well, that suggest that the Northwest Cape area around Exmouth has been the subject of a lot of ongoing weird phenomena, and even into more recent times. And the broad spectrum of them goes from UFOs, mysterious creatures, all sorts of weird phenomena going on there. So it is a repeating pattern. It's hard to know what to make of it all.
Do you think that the base itself is one of the reasons why this level of consciousness is occurring? It has one of the largest antenna systems in the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, but not every place that has this range of phenomena has heavy-duty antenna systems existing in them. It may be a factor, but it's not a factor in other localities that I've looked into personally. I know that the phenomena that I examined during the 70s at a place called Mount Butler outside of Armidale, one of the curious things was that one of the more significant close encounter cases that took place in that general area was on the same road, literally, and within 100 yards or so from the university ionosphere research station, which was sending up low frequency signals into the ionosphere to measure the ionosphere, and so that was an interesting connection. And in fact, that pretty much occurred in the same month or so of the Northwest Cape case from 1973. But the frequencies involved were very low frequencies at Mount Butler, or near Mount Butler, just outside of Armidale, with the university transmitting station there, and very high frequencies, or ultra low frequencies, I should say, with the Northwest Cape. They were using these ultra low frequencies to communicate with the submarine systems or submarine network from the US Navy, and so it was interesting to get that unusual correlation of different frequencies involved in those two ranges of events. So there's a lot to be had with examining our UFO past or UAP past, if you're more comfortable with it. There's so much there that represents to people like myself a lot of lost opportunities that could be readily regained if people are prepared to look at this data.
Isn't that interesting? In a sense, it's like, in hindsight, a lot of this stuff may be getting right in front of us. Now, I'm just curious, Bill, is the Oz still in print?
No, it's not. Although I'm possibly planning to do a new edition of it, but don't rush out to get it yet. So there's a lot of data there that can be readily added, and I've got some friends that are trying to assist me with that as well. So it'd be interesting if I can get that out. There's so much of the history of the UFO subject in Australia that's been somewhat not stated, or people aren't aware of it, and it'd be good to be able to get that kind of detail into a revised edition. And
it'd be great one day to talk to you about the history of Australian ufology. Gerald and Jale and Healy can sit out here and everything that became of it. But also want to know about this book, which is such an important book, Care of the Alien, DNA and other forensic evidence of alien abduction. Is that still in print?
You can certainly get that book, via Amazon. So, yep.
Oh, great.
Print on demand. So, yeah. I've got to say, I highly recommend that book. Who's the author?
Absolutely brilliant researcher, world-class researcher. Now look, I think I've got a really bad feedback problem here with our heads on the phone. We have taken up enough of your time. It's been a very busy day for you. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure to have you back on Untold Radio. And I want to get you back when I haven't got this feedback problem to discuss the relationship of water with these events and to also look into lots of other anomalies around the southern hemisphere, especially maybe your relationship with New Zealand as well.
Maybe talk about historical UFO cases, because Chris Ubeck of the Magania Exchange Network has come out with volume 1 of Alien Artifacts, which is basically about events from antiquity through to the 1880s, and the forgotten story of how we came to believe in visitors from the stars. Very interesting introductory volume, and the next one hopefully due out soon. And I'm planning to review this. It's quite a really interesting read and a great introduction or great kind of investigation of the phenomenon or the cultural history of the subject that seems to go back far earlier than most people thought, and a lot of fascinating research going into that book.
Now, where will people be able to read that review of yours? Where do they go to look at your blog?
I'll probably put a copy of it on the Oz Files blog spot, or the blog site that I've got, and also maybe it'll turn up in UFO Truth magazine as well, which is a electronic magazine out of the UK that I do a regular column for. It could turn up in a number of different locations. So yeah.
Are you still active in the world of field research? If people have an incident they want to get in touch with you about?
Yeah, sure. It's COVID and other things have put a big dent in the ability to do that kind of thing. But certainly, I'm still curious about interesting cases, etc. And if there's anything there that's out there that's worthwhile, sort of as an investigation, I'd be happy to get into it. Resources permitting, so and time, of course.
So where could they contact you about that?
Well, either via my blog page or Facebook page, or it's pretty easy to find me. And
go on.
Yeah, mate, through my Facebook page or my blog site, probably the easiest way.
All right, Bill. I want to thank you deeply for your time. I know it's been a very busy day for you, and we wish you all the best in the future. And I think we're actually a much richer culture by having your expertise behind us when it comes to documenting these extraordinary cases. I sincerely hope that fourth volume of the UFO Encyclopedia comes out, and just thank you again, and take good care.
Yeah, I think if people look at the UFO Encyclopedia when it does come out, even in its previous editions, they'll realise that there's more than just me contributing to the subject. There are literally a cast of thousands that are contributing to our understanding of the UFO subject and also its latest iteration as UAP.
But when it comes to down south, I think you've really got the iceberg on the top of that cake going. So we really appreciate your time and who you are. Have a great evening and take care.
Take care. Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.
All right. So we will be back next week.
I hope with no echoing in my headphones.
With another interesting podcast. And we'll see you then.
You've been on Down South Anomalies. Good night.